And good evening, everyone, once again to We Are the Builders Australia, live number 17. And we are broadcasting, well, we're broadcasting from the land of Jaja Warong, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders, the past, present, and the future, and of the First Nations people's struggle against, first of all, against colonial rule and invasion, which is now part of much of a broader struggle against imperialism, against our common foe, the imperialist class. And I'd like to once again welcome to the other co-hosts. Helen, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Very good. I'm glad it's nearly time to finish work.
Certainly is. It's last week for me. Tomorrow's my last day. And over to you, Nate, from Sydney. How are you going up there?
They're going well. I'd like to take a moment to say how great this time of year is, both that we get to have some time off work and spend with our families, and on the other side of things is that we get to maybe spend more time doing things like this, where we can actually learn some more and contribute more to the discussion.
All right. Very good. And I'll just actually acknowledge it'd be great. This is our last live, I think, for the year, and we're resuming back in late January. And actually, I'm looking forward to the break as well. As break last day tomorrow, Christmas party, and then I'm off from the 20th, and I'll be back to work on the 17th. But I'm looking forward to this break. It's been one hell of a year. It'd be good to put it behind us as well, one aspect to it, but there's also some good points. Well, look, just for all the viewers out there, we're finishing off tonight, the last meeting of the year, with Peru Libre, the program of the Peru Libre Party. And tonight we just two more chapters plus some thought from their leader. I think his name was, from their teacher, Jame Teron Palomino. And so it shouldn't take us too long tonight. So once again, what we'll do, I think we'll just read 2 or 3 paragraphs each, and we'll continue on. Then once I think we finish the chapter, we'll just we'll have a small discussion and look for any of the viewers out there. If you wish to ask any questions or us to address anything related to this, please feel free to make some comments in the comment section below. And also ask viewers out there to please share this far and wide. Like it, share it, invite other people to come on board with this as well. So we'll kick it off. It's chapter 20, our rights over the territorial sea. And Helen, could you start it off, please?
Sure. So our country has one of the few richest seas on the planet, scientifically proven by its abundant hydrobiological and energy wealth. Naturally, neoliberal capitalism has taken an eye on it and is currently in dispute between our coastal people and the merchant and fishing transnationals. Danger of Convemar. In 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Convemar, was created, which mentions every state has the right to establish the width of its territorial sea up to a limit that does not exceed 12 nautical miles. That is, it intends to cede our seas to the world and relegate us from 200 miles to only 12. Many nations have signed this treaty renouncing their sovereign territorial sea because they are not rich seas like ours, or they are already predated, allowing the installation of an exclusive economic zone, which Convemar considers from mile 24 to mile 200. It also states the coastal state will determine its capacity to capture the living resources of the exclusive economic zone. When the coastal state does not have the capacity to exploit all the allowable catch, it will give access to other states. Our country does not have the mentioned capacity, even less without the national merchant marine that had allowed exploitation for food and commercial purposes. If we allowed other high-tech countries to enter our sea, it would end up predating our hydrobiological wealth with irreversible damage. Nate, you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Regarding the exclusive economic zone, it states no state may claim or exercise sovereignty or sovereign rights over any part of the zone or its resources. All rights over the resources of the zone belong to all humanity. These resources are inalienable. However, the minerals extracted from the area may only be disposed of in accordance with this part and the rules, regulations, and procedures of the authority. No state or natural or legal person shall claim, acquire, or exercise rights with respect to the minerals extracted from the area, except in accordance with this part, quote, the renunciation of all our sovereignty over the sea, its bed and subsoil rich in minerals and oil resources is clearly stipulated. The loss of control over the 200 nautical miles will also lead us to modify or disappear our projection rights over the Antarctic of Peru of approximately 1 million kilometers. The amputation of the territorial sea would bring negative political, geopolitical, labor, cultural, tourist, transportation, and especially economic consequences to the Peruvian people, so our rejection of the Covenmar is clear and forceful. The Peruvian state must have design plans for the control and better exploitation of our territorial sea based on the majority, such as having a natural merchant marine and generating an increase in the national economy for the benefit of the majority. Likewise, it must promote decentralization by granting precise rights to regional governments over the sea of their coasts, and that they can not only raise awareness about their defence, but also enjoy their wealth with autonomy.
Yeah,
Go on,
quite interesting that.
David.
Or, well, before we go on to chapter 21, does anyone would mention any comment, make any comment about that, or any questions?
Yeah, it's a short but pithy chapter, I thought. And I mean, it's not really making any sort of nitty-gritty points, but the overall point that it's making for those who are following is that it's basically saying we want sovereignty over our own territorial waters. And basically what that entails is we want to control trade, we want to control the environmental protections for that territory, and we want to control traffic in that territory. And I'd be very curious to see if there's anybody watching right now to see who would not agree with that. If there is anybody who genuinely disagrees with that, I would genuinely like to know your reasons why. But I don't think that many people would disagree with that, with wanting that for their own country.
And my country, my question, sorry, is how did this get passed in 1982? I mean, this is the United Nations that, somehow has the agreement, I guess, of, the major powers that be, and all the people that sign on to the United Nations, and yet somehow this Convemar was created in 1982 and allows the reduction of territorial seas from 200 kilometers or 200 miles to 12 nautical miles, which is fascinating. I mean, how did that kind of get through? And was it the major country, the major big players that forced that vote, or it's just obviously small countries like Peru wouldn't want to have that imposed upon them, because as this document states, that it's an extremely rich rich in hydrobiological and energy wealth. So clearly somewhere like Peru wouldn't have wanted to allow this to pass, but it's, and then I wonder also, is Australia part of this Convemar?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does raise those questions.
Because we're talking about like sea territory rights and that, and it wasn't so long ago. I think what was it, about 20 years ago? Yeah, when if on in with regards to East Timor or Timor-Leste, and when Australia, it was pretty much Australia dominated by petrochemical or oil and gas, was basically trying to dictate the terms to the oil and gas rights for Timor-Leste and the border. Where's it start? Where's it finish? And I believe at the time Alexander Downer was the foreign minister, and he was having meetings there in Timor-Leste. He says, no, we wanted a lot more, and try to bully East Timor to give up more of their sea rights in such a way to say that allow the large multinationals to come in and obviously, drill for gas, and if there's any petroleum there as well, obviously oil, that'd be a prime product as well. And I'm curious to know myself who was behind of that one. What's it called again? The Convemar in 1982, and who was the actual people, groups or forces that actually drafted all that up in the first place, and then started to dictate the terms and conditions to everyone else, every other country around the world. And it sounds like it's both internal and external threat. Not only Peru at the time had the external forces against them, but also the internal threat. So the government at the time, no doubt, was prepared to sell Peru down the drain. Yeah, sure, we'll accept the 200-mile limit, and we don't need any more. And obviously, some money went in there somewhere, and and a lot of pocketing. There would have been a lot of corruption involved in that as well. So basically, the population of Peru itself was just basically sold down the gurgler. For some of the rights of multinationals to come in and saying, or wherever else at the time. That's what I get in the gist of it. I could be completely wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but that's what I'm looking at it.
Yeah, and I'm just online having a look at it, and I have a feeling it may only be within the Latin American region. There's just the document that I was looking at was only mentioning Mexico and a few other countries. So it may be just a Latin American.
I think you're probably right.
We have to find out more about it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think in the larger geopolitical context, at the time, South America or Latin America was going through a process of neoliberalization. And for those following at home, what it basically means is it's a process of opening up free markets and privatizing everything, and trying to make things basically go from a military dictatorship down to a sort of more open society. With that, you get privatization, you get lower wages, all that kind of stuff. The person who was in charge of Peru at the time was Fernando Bolonde Terry, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he was part of the Popular Action Party, which was, unsurprisingly, a very liberal and reformist political party. So there would be no doubt have been some, I would say, agreements between the Peruvian state, his party, and multinational corporations in order to privatize trade, privatize a lot of those sea routes, privatize a lot of the territorial waters, all that kind of stuff. I don't know the specifics of that, so if anybody who's listening can correct us or add more information, that'd be really good. But this is what we know of, in the larger geopolitical context that's happening in that area.
All right. Well, look, we'll move on to the next one, chapter 21, our foreign policy. For I'll kick it off, and then we'll read about 3 chapters, and I'll pass on to Helen, and then over to you, Nate. Our foreign policy. Peru and the international community. The neoliberals are enemies of the regional integration of peoples and the development. They know that in this way, an inappropriate negotiation with developed countries and transnationals is prevented. Peruvian neoliberals think that integration only consists of increasing international trade and opening our markets. Presidents Rafael Correa, Evo Morales, Nestor Kirchner, Cristina Fernández, Lula da Silva, Dilma Rousseff, Fidel Castro, Raúl Castro, Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro, Manuel Zelaya, Daniel Ortega, and Pepe Mujica were at the highest point of integration Latin America. Based on sovereign principles, was a group of presidents that gave dignity to the continent. Unfortunately, our country has always been a disappointment in the face of these attempts. The US designed a political, legal, economic, commercial, financial, media, and military plan for the dependence of our countries under its design, creating for this purpose many apparently democratic supranational institutions. Helen.
Organization of American States, the OAS. It constitutes a body of geopolitical control of Latin America and the Caribbean. Fidel Castro called it the Ministry of Finance of Latin America, in charge of recolonization, under whose protection or indifference coup d'etats were endorsed in several countries, strictly complying with orders from the United States. To counteract this power, the progressive governments created the Community of American and Caribbean States, CELAC or CELAC, whose purpose is to create a bloc that allows us to process our own regional conflicts with autonomy, international arbitration centers. To achieve commercial legal control, an international justice system was created at the service of the transnationals, which are partial to big world capital, whom they end up covering with cloaks of impunity. The International Centre for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, of the World Bank, the UN International Court of The Hague, the United Nations Commission for International Trade Law, etc., are commercial control centres in order to exercise commercial legal control over nations. The arbitrators are enriched by each case, seen ruling in favour of those who manage to corrupt them. Apart from the commissions and the payment of litigants, each arbitrator earns between $200,000 to $300,000 US per case. To counteract this phenomenon, the proposal is to create the Disputes Resolution Centre of the Union of South American Nations, or the bilateral investment treaties, as arbitration centres.
The Inter-American Rights or Human Rights System is another component. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is an organ of the OAS, headquartered in Washington, surprise, surprise. It has 8 reporterships, but only one has mixed funding by the US and the European Union. The reportership on freedom of expression, whose perimeter is important to them as a guarantor of democracy, the US has not ratified its participation in the IACHR, or the Inter-American Human Rights System, but finances it so as not to lose control of the institution. Likewise, we have the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is an organ of the OAS based in San Jose, Costa Rica, has the mission of applying the American Convention on Human Rights, from whose report a country can be acquitted or sentenced, paving the legal path for a blockade or military intervention by the US. Both the IACHR and the Inter-American Court make up the Inter-American Human Rights System, although due to their biased behavior towards imperialism, some countries have decided to abandon them. The other component is the Financial Action Task Force. It was created by rich superpowers in 1989, the famous G8, made up of Russia, Canada, the US, France, United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, and Italy, the same ones that issued recommendations after 9/11 in order to maintain control mechanisms to the financing of terrorism, laundering in nations, or financing for the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In South America, they are called the South American Financial Action Group, or the Latin American Financial Action Group, made up of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, who give themselves the license to qualify countries on grey and black lists, imposing financial sanctions on those who do not abide by their rules, and can be an endorsement of any measure of force on our nations. Some of these have paradises prosecutors. I think there's probably a translation error there. Institutions that serve for money laundering, demonstrating their double standards. Dave?
Non-governmental organisations, NGOs. Well, this gets better. They are generally financed by the US and have the mission of controlling social sectors with political repercussions. Surprise, surprise. For example, those that deal with the disabled. Says glass of milk clubs. I don't know what that means. Human rights, LGTBI, feminists, indigenous people, freedom of the press, environmentalists, circle of intellectuals, etc. The NGOs are financed from the first world, with well-paid officials who present themselves, for example, as defenders of nature, when in their countries of origin they support the most inhumane system that is causing global warming. They finance national foundations that are actually political parties that failed at the poll to be in opposition to governments. Garcia Linera says that the NGOs are organisations of other governments in our countries. They want to assign us a role in the new division of labour. They produce knowledge that they privatise, and we produce environmental goods that can be freely consumed, such as, for example, carbon or Ramsar zones. According to Dr. Jose Larrocamp, imperialism, through thousands of NGOs, has found a mechanism through which thousands of mercenaries have organised these institutions in order to control, manipulate, etc., the masses and orchestrate thousands of counter-revolutionary apparatuses. Banca del Sur and the Fondo del Sur. Okay, the proposal comes from UNISA. Since many of our countries have to financially support the international banks controlled by the US, such as the IDB, by making annual deposits or using our reserves. Thus, as Latin America, we have more than 1,000 million I think it's probably about $1 billion US dollars in the first world, but we continue to depend on external loans and foreign investments. While those reserves earn 0.5 to 1%, those same tickets are loaned to us at rates of 6, 7, or 8%. This means a net transfer of wealth and liquidity to the richest countries in the world. So the proposal is to create the Bank of the South and Fund of the South, taking advantage of our savings and allocating it to investment in our same region, and may also consider in the future an extra regional currency which transfers wealth to the issuer of the said currency.
Non-negotiable zone for imperialism. Latin America has been considered by imperialism a non-negotiable security area, and from Alaska to Argentina, part of the national identity of the United States, which forces us to prepare ourselves socially, politically, and militarily against the imperial decadence that is not willing to die without endurance. The US will not hesitate to use all the resources at its disposal to avoid consolidating unity. To avoid consolidating unity based on sovereign political projects. Politically and militarily for the US, losing control over Latin America would be an offense and a bad precedent for its world hegemonic claims, and the violence with which it reacts to the independent attempt of a Latin American conscious of its sovereign mission is not accepted. Continental economic position vis-a-vis the US. According to Correra, the countries that make up UNESUR add up to 500 million inhabitants and 17 million square kilometers. And just by joining together, we could form the fourth largest economy in the world, with 5.9% of the world's GDP, a third of the sources of the fresh water of the planet, with the first place in world food production of food and hydrocarbon reserves for the next 100 years. It also states that economic competition between our countries must end, that it is not possible for the general sales tax to be 12% in Ecuador, 16% in Colombia, 18% in Peru, generating an absurd competition between our peoples. It proposes to establish only IGV, which is a general sales tax, at the South American level. It also justifies that wages should be high. Latin America as a territory of peace. Our country must contribute so that our continent consolidates itself as a territory of peace, free from foreign military bases, rescuing and strengthening its sovereignty, eradicating any type of neo-colonialist intervention, and reaffirming the anti-imperialist Latin American unity. We have a historical duty to actively participate in the fight against arms and the danger of war. According to Baron, we have the mission of neutralizing the cultural war promoted by the US, consecrating the idea that they are the model country that we must imitate, because any alternative motto is retrograde, failed, outdated, etc.
Here's something that's in no way controversial. Decolonization policy. So we must fight against the cultural hegemony imposed for the purposes of popular exploitation, the product of a policy violently imposed on our continent. Decolonization is a liberation of the subjugated peoples of the cultural, economic, military, educational, religious, etc. planes. In this colonizing framework, the elites developed a new division of labor. The superpowers should be in Europe, the industrialized in North America, and the extractivists in Latin America. And that brings us to a passage by the teacher Jaime Serón Palomino. So yeah, we can probably just go through that quickly. So this is a quote from him. So he goes on to say, if humanity that still lives oppressed in much of the globe yearns to achieve liberation from the unfavorable conditions in which it operates, the interesting thing is not to make the philosophy unprecedentedly Peruvian or American. What matters is to question who is served by the philosophy, or failing that, ideology. In this sense, due to the same abysmal bifurcation between the social classes in our country, the immediate thing is to discuss which ideologies were and are still at the service of the oppressors, and which, on the other hand, have been concerned with achieving superior living conditions. At no time have the upper classes been concerned with designing their own non-imitative culture. No one has meditated on how education should lead to the happiness of the people, nor have they wondered how Peruvian society should be, the resources it should acquire, or the remedies to be applied. A legitimate history of the development of ideas in Peru should not present its content apart from the ideological struggle that operates not only in the university cloisters, but also in the bosoms of political parties, unions, municipalities, and various social organizations. For every Peruvian teacher, it is of essential interest to have to inform himself about the development of education in the world so that he can approach the Peruvian educational phenomenon from a critical prism. It is true that the Peruvian education is not only the result of colonizing foreign influence, also comes from its own ancient Inca roots, but it is precisely in this dialectic of the national and the foreign that this forging of our spirit, of our social conscience, has taken place, which has achieved development in different degrees. A specific treatise on history and philosophy of education in our country has not yet been written with the careful reflection that the case deserves. Various circumstances have conspired against this need. The different ways of approaching the periodization of our national history, the absence of written sources about the evolution of our primitive enslaved society, the variety of existing interpretations about the character of Inca society, the incorrect method with which the economic social development of Peru was analysed and is still being analysed, the preference that has been had by foreign texts that have been in charge of reforming the legitimate essence of our historical evolution, introducing schemes alien to the development of our economic base. I should probably mention here that Pedro Castillo, the president of Peru, was also a teacher himself. So this is
Yes.
probably a lot relevant. Did you want me to continue there, Dave?
I think
Well, just
that's the end, isn't it?
We've only got a
that's
couple
pretty much
pages left. Probably.
yeah, it's just a little bit of a biography of Vladimir
Oh, I see.
Chidron.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I don't think it should be right. I think we've pretty much completed it now. So, yeah, we'll open up for discussions and questions. I just found those last two bits, and especially that last chapter, was just like, man, I'm quietly nodding head. Yep, of course, I get that. And the roles the NGOs do play in these countries, they're there to basically to undermine the people and to hold them back. It's just what I find extraordinary. You've got this US sponsored human rights organisation, and you think, well, the US both is the worst abusers of human rights, both abroad and within their own country. You know, they've got the highest incarceration rate in the whole entire world. Their black people as well makes up the majority of it, along with their First Nations and people as well. Yeah, they've got the most amount of gun violence. I mean, you know, you just name it. The list keeps continuing. I mean, sure, they're a bigger population than what we have, but that's beside the point. I mean, in percentage, I mean, it's like I find it hypocritical where you got someone like Joe Biden having a summit about democracy. It should be actually relabeled hypocrisy, and treatment of human rights, treatment of people, and that, and they're the worst users of it worldwide.
Highest
yeah.
instance of homelessness at the moment as well.
Yes.
You know, highest instance of crime at the moment as well. Partially, thankfully, of how horribly they handled the COVID pandemic. You know, people are you know, poorer and more wretched than ever, unfortunately. So it's really ironic. I think as they control the definition and the narrative of human rights, they're able to weaponize it against other countries. You know, by making them see like the arbiters of what human rights is or isn't. They can then say, oh, well, that is human rights, depending on who they like and who they don't like overseas. So that also leads into that NGO thing as well, because these are organizations that are covertly funded by Washington, that are set up in other countries that are non-compliant, or maybe in countries that, you know, that Washington wants to keep compliant, who do push this thing of human rights, of what they define it as. You know, because never in their lexicon does it enter that human rights is providing free housing or providing food or providing debt relief or providing student supplies and debt relief and that kind of stuff, right? Never is that a human right. You know, this human rights thing is always these idealistic concepts that exist high up in the sky, where it's like, oh, we must be nice to people, and you know, they're very fluffy sounding things that don't actually manifest themselves concretely. which is very convenient, obviously, because if you're the US and you're the hegemonic empire of the world, you don't want to have to be responsible for those things, for providing these things to your people. So yeah, that's what these organizations do on behalf of Washington, and that's what's currently happening. Even now in Peru, they're trying to get rid of them, and in China, they've done a semi-good job of getting rid of them so far. I think they've got rid of most of them, and in other countries.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. This whole issue of democracy as well as the United States declaring itself the only democratic kind of country in the world, or puts itself on a pedestal as being this extremely democratic country. I think the Guardian had an article recently, and the title of it was China's New Age of Imperialism. Xi Jinping gives thumbs down to democracy. So there's a real push now to change the narrative on what's democracy,
and what's imperialism.
And what's imperialism? Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly also the same article was talking about imperialism as well, and saying that China is now the new imperialist country, and we of the US aligned nations, they're no longer imperialists. They don't fit that description anymore, because China now has taken over. And it's just incredible how they're changing the language that's to suit themselves. And it's something that, the danger of calling, no matter how we call it in our, from a left perspective, how we call these countries that we don't agree with as being socialist, because they might not fit our dogmatic approach to it. Or that we consider that somehow Lenin said something, and that this country is not doing exactly what Lenin said, so therefore they're not socialist. So therefore we'll give them another name like social imperialist, or we'll call them imperialist of some sort. Well, the problem with that, and this is what we're seeing now, is that we're ending up being the supporters of the imperialist media. And how can we now turn around and say, oh, no, that's not what we meant. We can't align ourselves with you because you're calling China imperialist, and now we're all confused because we said they were 10 years ago, but we can't be seen to be aligned with you either. So they're in a quagmire. They're in an absolute quagmire.
This article, and I had a real good laugh reading it. It demonstrates that the US's number one export now, besides debt and inflation, is copium, right? Because really, what they're trying to do is copium, right? It's like a sort of a invented word, because all they do is cope, right? They cope with other successful countries by basically the definition that they offer of imperialism is a successful country. Right, and this is a absurdly inadequate definition, because for multiple reasons, right? But foremost of them is that if you just say that a successful country is imperialist, then almost pretty much any country within the last 20 years who has improved somewhat is imperialist, right? And if all these countries are imperialist, then really the word imperialist lacks any meaning whatsoever. You've diluted the word by so far beyond recognition that it no longer serves a useful purpose, right? So, obviously this could be like another live just on its own, like what is imperialism, and then, is China imperialist and all that kind of stuff. Needless to say, I assume both of you don't consider China to be imperialist. Simply for the matter that China is not the one who is impoverishing other countries. China is the one building up other countries for win-win cooperation. It's not exporting. It's not exporting inflation like the US is. It's not keeping them to a dollar hegemony like the US is. These are just the tip of the iceberg of reasons why China is not imperialist. And this is exactly what Peru Libre is saying, where you have a hegemonic power that is controlling your sovereignty, essentially controlling your territorial waters, controlling your environmental sectors, and your resources and all that kind of stuff. That is all part of this system. Imperialism is not something that a country does. It's not a verb or an adjective. It's a system. So that's how we really got to think about it.
Yeah.
Can
And
I?
just on that too. Oh, you
I
go on,
was just going to
sorry.
say, can I read the quote out? I have it here in front of me. I found it. So
Yeah, you
this
go.
is what this article in the Guardian said. Imperialism in all its awful forms still poses a threat. Tisdall, this is the author, writes, but it is no longer the imperialism of the West, rightly excregated and self-condemned, as though the imperialism of the West has condemned itself. Today's threat emanates from the East. Just as objectionable and potentially more dangerous, it is the prospect of a totalitarian 21st century Chinese global empire. And this is the rhetoric that is
That's a
being
lot of cope in one sentence.
Yeah, it's a lot of copium.
Wow. Oh, yeah, there was a lot of copium. Right? Oh, they must have had a line of copium somewhere to an article like that.
If you take apart every word in that sentence, right, they may as well have been speaking into a mirror. This is literally but at this point, every accusation that the US makes against China is an admission of guilt, right? It's a confession. So you could easily apply all of those words and all of those accusations back to the US in the last 100 years, and that would be no less true of China.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just so to make that, because Dust is saying that he's much watching. Good morning. Hello, Dust. Must be pretty early over there at the moment. So, yeah, but he's the host. I'll co-host with him, Working Class Revolt every weekend. We had Jay Tharapal on our program a few weeks ago, and Jay did an excellent presentation about explaining why China is not imperialist, and very detailed as well. He's wrote a good thesis about it. It's part of his his university PhD, and I think it's great how he just broke it down and explained it, and our whole view of imperialism. And imperialism, unlike in Lenin's day of 1916, where it was these great powers like Germany on one side, Britain on the other, etc. But but even by 1921, Lenin's view of imperialism advanced even further as well, and explained what it was then. It was the aftermath of World War One. It was aftermath of the Russian Revolution and the war of intervention into the Soviet Union. And even now, where we have a look at it, it's a completely different world now. And to actually go around and they're saying China is imperialist. Well, basically, or the propaganda behind that is to keep us on a constant war footing, to find someone to blame to first of all deflect on what's going on in our own respective countries. COVID was the mishandling of the whole COVID thing is a great way for any national government to focus their attention. Why don't we just focus back in attention? Oh, well, China, bad. Oh, we'll get everyone worked up about it and everything else. And so it gets to basically try and keep us on a war footing. And if that article in the Guardian, I believe in the International Guardian, and at the times it was basically the left arm of imperialism, and them to come out and say something like that is there to actually, one, confuse people, but also make sure we've got a boogeyman in the world, even though China is no threat to any of you, I, or anyone else watching this, or anyone or any other work in the world. But I know they are a threat for someone. And the only threat they would play is because they've now surpassed the US as the economic superpower. Really, their economy has surpassed the US. The US is losing. So they're trying everything. They're trying what basically is the old saying. They're trying to clutch at straws now. We'll find something else. We'll find something else. Find the boogeyman. Next thing it'll be China. Oh, I don't know. It'd be something else. It's basically saying, if President Xi Jinping was walking on water, they'll turn around. He can't swim. Oh my God! They'll make up some extraordinary story, and basically to demonise China and its leaders as well. And really, it also too play on everyone's fear of economic fears. Nielsen blame China for this, blame China for that. A comet just passed Earth. Oh, it must be China's fault. It just, God.
Or my other thing, their articles have a whole other genre of China blaming called, but at what cost? Right? There's always something that they say China's doing really greatly, but at the end they have to append at what cost. It's almost as if like, we can't have the benefits that China is giving its people because it comes at some kind of like a heavy cost or something. So it's just them coping of China, of the success of China's objectively superior socialist planned economy, and them not being able to, or not being willing to do the same. And so it must be because they have some nefarious circumstances. It must be because they're totalitarian or authoritarian, or this and that. So yeah, you summed it up perfectly. But to go back to what Dust was saying earlier, yeah, everybody, please go check out Jay's presentation and his papers and articles. He excellently explains how imperialism works in the 21st century. If you really want to get an honest idea of how imperialism works and why China is not imperialist, please go check it out. Even if you disagree, it's actually really beneficial for you, especially if you disagree, to have a look and to engage with what we're saying. Because at least, who knows, maybe you could make a better argument, and maybe you could convince any of us, right? Maybe, who knows? But you won't know until you actually go and honestly look and engage with what we're saying.
Yeah. Exactly. And just on that note too, because it was brought up about certain ultra left elements out there, and we've got them here in this country regarding China as social imperialist. Not understanding when Lenin used that term back in the early 20th century, is during the the last days of the Second International, where those parties still were aligning with their respective imperialist masters, or their bourgeoisie, to support the First World War. That's what he meant by they're socialist by name, but imperialist by deed, and that's what he meant by that. And that was there to refer to it then, but to actually now use it the same thing for China is totally incorrect. And what they will find on the ultra left, well, they're going to find themselves in the camp of the warmongers, of the pro-imperialist camp again, because the reality is, okay, they're taking that line, and they say they too are in fact attacking a country that's not imperialist. It is leading the way, building win-win support amongst a lot of other countries, and that building up power, doing great things, and that not just for themselves, but a lot of other people. So, and basically playing into that war footing. It's interesting. I've been to rallies where these type of people turn up, be it anti-war rallies or anti-imperialist rallies, and then they go spruiking the same line. Well, and also too, once again, it deliberately misleads and confuses the masses, at the end of the day. So I suppose, right opportunism, we can talk about that one end, but left sectarian or ultra leftism on the other hand, they go hand in hand in on one aspect. So they find up they're wanting themselves more they up in a dead end. They can't seem to if they stick to that line, they're not going to go anywhere. In fact, they're going to make themselves, completely irrelevant. So I think it's quite important. Look, and once again, thanks, Nate, for pointing out, that a really great presentation Jay Tharapul did. I think it's, look, I'll encourage all the viewers, and even those who are not will be catching up with this later on. Go to Dust James and Imperialist America on YouTube. It's on there. I think it's about 4 or 5 weeks ago we had him on there. Correct me wrong, but it's definitely there, and we talked about that. That was a really good show. That a lot of viewers watching it too, so very educational.
Yeah.
I wonder. I'm just going back reading Peru Libre, and where it talks about Latin America as being considered by imperialism, basically part of the national identity of the United States, and I wonder how we're feeling at the moment about the role of the United States in Australia. We've never had such blatant policies towards Australia from the United States, and of course Australia's been extremely diplomatic in the way that it is supportive of the United States. And I guess being so many miles away makes us in a slightly geopolitically different kind of region, and our role is different in this region. But it's still, the effects of that now are showing more and more the influence that America has over Australia, and the kowtowing that Australia is doing to the United States, and that's been shown in this recent AUKUS decision, where you can have a $90 billion deal with. A $90 billion deal with a country, and then all of a sudden turn around and basically wipe that deal out within 24 hours and go with another country that's wasn't even on the radar. So it's it's an interesting dilemma that Australia is in at the moment. I think we're acting more and more like a colonized country than probably, except for probably prior to World War II, when we were in the backs, where the motherland was England, and we were considered just another state of England. But now, then we kind of went through that war, that after the war period, where we probably seemed as though we had a certain amount of autonomy. But all along, we've, the margin of our autonomy is becoming, and our sovereignty is becoming less and less. We're getting squeezed more and more by the United States. And that begs, that brings to mind the question of housing in Australia. And I think, the housing crisis that we're facing in Australia is part of this whole thing as well. And I just want to bring to the attention of viewers the impact that the United States is having on Australia in terms of housing. And I've got a very funny feeling that the large equity firm Blackstone is responsible for buying up a lot of housing here in Australia.
Is that BlackRock?
BlackRock, sorry, BlackRock.
Okay, yeah.
And they're doing it around the world. And I think it's something that we need to be really aware of, because they are buying up houses all through the United States, kicking people out of their homes, gentrifying areas, and they'll sell them at profits and so on. And I've got a feeling that in Australia, that's what's happening as well. That's what's pushing up the housing prices as well. So viewers should be aware of that and do a bit of investigation because it's not ordinary Australians that can afford to buy a home in Australia anymore. It's out of our price range. And so there must be some mechanism that is forcing the prices up. There's somebody that is buying them, or some conglomerate that is buying everything up.
A lot of people don't know here in Australia, like the narrative is that, China's this big bad bully who's forcibly buying up everything, blah, blah, blah. Number one, there's two wrong things about that. Number one, who's selling it to them, right? I mean, it's our government that ultimately sells something. Nobody can buy anything off you if you aren't selling it, right? So that's number one. Number two is that it's not actually China that's buying up most of the stuff here, most of the land, right? According to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I've got it here, the biggest foreign landowner here in Australia is by far the United States. And it's followed closely by the United Kingdom, and then Belgium, and then Japan, and then, and then you've got obviously businesses located in Hong Kong, right? Because obviously they operate on a different system to mainland China. So it lists Hong Kong separately. And then it lists Singapore, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and then finally you get to Chinese businesses. And then, people like to say like, oh, but what if, there are Chinese businesses that are based in these other countries? Okay, but you could say that about any other country. So then it just completely invalidates the entire argument of who owns what, right? So we have to, draw the line somewhere and analyze this from a way where it's like, does it really matter who it is, what country it is that's buying up our natural resources and land? Really, the root of the argument is who is selling it to them and why. And why is our government allowed to sell our own resources and land? And why do we not, as people, as Australians ourselves, why do we not have the ability to renege these decisions made on our behalf without our consent? So there you go. It's not China at all. But even if it was, like, who's selling it to them? That's what you got to ask yourself.
Yeah. And I think it's a very valid point you've raised there. It's all about blaming everyone else, but we should be looking to our own. I mean, I was interesting. I've heard the same argument, all the Chinese ownership of all this land and agricultural land and stuff, but really it's a very, very tiny minority. And actually, when I brought up, what about the largest foreign power or foreign interest in buying up large agricultural land, be it for stock or produce, is Britain still. And then followed by US and Japan, etc. So, and then European. Chinese investment to a certain degree is actually down on the ground, but they all tend to want to buy them. Oh, but China that. Oh, now they're all taking the water. Well, no, the biggest ones that are thieving our water are countries like was it Monsanto or Santos, the big agriculture, big agribusiness, and and taking that water out, storing it, the whole lot, but it somehow has to be China's fault for somewhere in there, just to blame them for the hell of it, So. And I think we've got to keep that all back. And this is the thing of Australia, that we've got to get this all back into context and find out who really owns what in Australia. And you find out most of the time it's Wall Street, London, and Tokyo, predominantly, and also then the European countries, other degree. I find it quite interesting. When people were going on about China, but I think also too one thing about about it being a security threat. Well, let's look at Chinese history, Chinese relations and history towards Australia. China's has never invaded us. We've never been at war with China. In fact, the Chinese people have fought alongside us in both major world wars, especially World War II. They actually, it was not just the Soviet Union that turned things around. I think for us in Australia, we've got a lot to be grateful for the Chinese people. I think they lost over 20 million lives against the Japanese invasion, but they gave it all they got. If they didn't and just completely capitulated and surrendered, all those millions of Imperial Japanese soldiers would have been heading straight forward here. We'd have no chance in hell of stopping that. So, I mean, we've got to be thankful. And funny enough, the people who put the stop to it were the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, Chairman Mao. Under his leadership, they actually led the charge and organised it. So, since when did they ever come to affect us? They haven't done one thing. So, I think we've got to keep that in effect. When people say, when they're trying to actually treat China as the enemy, China not once as far as I go. I've done my research thoroughly, and correct me, I'm happy to be wrong with something point something out, but as far as I go, there's never been an attack by China on Australia anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. Even economically, right? If you say, okay, well, maybe not militarily, but economically, here's the thing, right? Like as Australia stopped exporting coal to China, the US was extremely quick to offer their coal for a more competitive price to China, completely knowing that we had stopped selling coal to China. If you really look at the fact that this is supposed to be our greatest ally, the US, who needs enemies, right? I mean, if you're being undercut, right? When you got friends like these, who needs enemies, right? If we're being undercut, right, it was almost orchestrated to the point where it's like, there we go, and we just offer them gold for a more competitive price. So it's just like, who really hates China here, right? Like, I mean, we've been driven to be the tip of the spear against China, but at the other hand, America's more than happy, or the US is more than happy to benefit from that antagonism between Australia and China when it suits them. Really, who's being played here? Who's being played here? Is it China, or is it Australia, or is it both? I mean, we're both being played against each other as far as I can see. And it's about time we wake up and see who's the real puppet master here. Who's the one who's really orchestrating these media smear campaigns and getting us to have one opinion or the other about, geopolitical allies or enemies?
Yeah, we are. There's one other thing that sorry.
I was just going to say, just on that, because Australia has just been basically doing the dirty work of the United States. It's like, well, the United States doesn't have to say anything. Well, we want you to have these submarines. We'll get you this, get you that. Keep going. Australia, they're doing well while they're taking over the wheat exports, wine now, beef, everything else. We're losing. It's not the first time this has happened either, and it's not with China. The war on Iraq was a classic example. That was our biggest exporter for wheat to Iraq. Guess what happened? And John Howard allowed it to happen. We lost all that, and we had to have a Royal Commission, the Australian Wheat Board, and everything. And basically, we lost one of their biggest export markets at the time. Guess who took it over from there? US wheat.
Our bestest buddy.
Our bestest. And of course, the more and more the United States is in economic trouble, which it's basically a bankrupt country. Let's face it. And the more and more they need markets, the more they're going to take them off their friends and allies. I mean, they have to. The world markets are shrinking, and this is the United States themselves imposing sanctions on countries. They've imposed sanctions on 50 countries around the world because they're not doing what the United States likes. So they sanction them. And they somehow think that those sanctions are going to have, an effect of starving the people. Well, you'd think that they'd learn by now that their sanctions actually don't work. And if anything, it makes countries stronger and more determined to assert their independence. And so, the US markets are shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. And so, of course, they have to steal from, they're like scavengers. They just go around stealing from other countries. And we're talking about trade and so on.
Trying to offload their inflation.
I just want to say one more thing. It serves the purpose of, of course, this whole squabble between China and Australia is that it's a divide and rule tactic as well. It's constantly dividing working class against working class, preventing international solidarity with countries and so on. And that's another kind of ideological aspect to the whole thing.
Do you guys think that things will ever erupt into a full-blown hot war between the US and China, or do you think that the US is more than happy to just toe the line and just push to the brink of just underneath a hot war, just to make sure that the military contractors keep getting their cut and all that kind of stuff, to keep the wheels turning, that kind of thing? Is that really where we think it will end up, or do you think it'll get even more than that?
I think there's two sides to that. One is that the impossibility of war means that we probably won't have a war, and what you were saying about just simply constantly spending money on war that doesn't necessarily go anywhere is probably just as good for the United States economy as a hot war would be, without the problems associated with a hot war. But the other side of that, of course, is that the understanding of imperialism is that it's driven to war. It's driven to war by its need for the markets, and as imperialism's markets are shrinking, it's making war more, and it's driving it into a corner, making war more and more possible.
Right, because obviously that huge market's locked away, right, and more markets have kept getting locked away from the imperialists. So they're going to become increasingly desperate to unlock those markets, and really the only way you can unlock those markets is by death and destruction.
Exactly. So it's to be played. It's still to be played out in the arena, the international arena. But it's a real possibility, and it's something that we should be concerned about.
Especially given our position here in Australia. We've had the AUKUS deal happen, and with the nuclear subs that ostensibly won't arrive before 2040, but that's besides the point. The fact that we are the proverbial proxy bully in the high school, and when you have a bully who's pushing someone else to go and fight on their behalf, they're the ones who are going to get hit. So really, that's what our position kind of is here, and it's a very precarious position, because if it actually does erupt, either intentionally or unintentionally, we will be a very, very easy target for China to defend themselves, because we're being the main aggressors here on behalf of an imperialist hegemony.
And I think that.
Just on that, because I think also too, I'm saying, I think China has no interest to attack us by military at all. No. They don't have to anyway. They don't want to. They won't need to do that. I mean, I don't think just for Australia. I mean, they're playing the Australian politicians and the elites here. They're playing in some very political and foreign political hot water here with the foreign policy as well. And the fact is, as said, the rest of the world, the rest of the world just look at Australia. It was basically, who's this loose cannon of a country, whatever, and just completely, it will just lose its standing in the world anyway. And those other countries that probably more aligned with China, well, who wanted to trade with Australia anymore? Who wanted to do that and leave it completely neglected? So, in fact, our own elites, what we're basically doing through our political apparatus, is basically isolating Australia from the rest of the world deliberately, because everyone says, oh, well, this is just the lapdog for doing the dirty work for the US foreign policy. I'm not a fan of Paul Keating by any means, but when he did that interview with the Australian Associated Press, or whatever it was, the press club, and that, I mean, there was some key points. Actually, I did agree with. Taiwan is no strategic interest to us here in Australia, nothing
Mm.
at all. In fact, it is part of China. It calls itself Republic of China. There's no such thing as a Taiwanese. And there was actually China in the 1990s. Their policy was to have two systems, one country, and they applied that to Taiwan as well. So that give the actual eventual transition into the Chinese system. Yeah, and it's got nothing to play with us all. But and now in Australia, geographically, we're part of the Oceanic or part of that Southeast Asia. I mean, we should be getting along with our neighbours in a peaceful win-win situation as well. So, I mean, why aren't we? Why can't we be the centre of it again, where we're supposed to be? I mean, we're fortunate because we don't actually have any sort of land borders with any country or anything like that. We're surrounded by sea, but we are heavily dependent on shipping as well for import export. And and something goes wrong, we could be completely it could be was a catastrophe for Australia. So I mean, it's more in our interest to have a peaceful relations with everyone else. Yes, you'd have a navy and that, but that's only strictly for defence. That's what it was designed to do, not to be on the attack. I mean, we're ordering 12 nuclear Virginia class attack submarines. What sort of signal is that going to send to a country like China or anyone else in that matter? I mean, what do we need them for? Really, they're not there for the purpose of defending. They're there
It's
for the
just a
purpose.
shame that that money isn't being spent on building up our own industries, on making
Yeah,
sure that we have self-sufficiency in food, in energy, in all that kind of stuff that really matters, that people here in this country really want. No one in this country wants war with China or anyone else. With that $90 billion could make so much more difference to our country. It could make us such a valuable trading hub. Right, we could be producing things, we could be manufacturing things, we could bring all that manufacturing industry that everybody used to love and talks about wistfully in Australia that we used to have 20, 30 years ago. We could bring that back and better, right? We could become a renewable energy hub, manufacturing hub. We could become a hub of advanced manufacturing technology. We could do all these things, and we could have high-speed transport here and there, all that kind of stuff. If we didn't just put all that money into defense like the US wants us to do. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day what you think about China, whether you like them or whether you don't. It's really a pointless discussion. The fact of the matter is, what would you rather Australia do? Would you rather Australia put all its money into defence and then well, in this case it'd be offence because we're the ones that are off China's coast knocking things
the war
doors.
industry, yeah.
Exactly, right? We don't want a war industry here in Australia. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to take care of Australians, our own people, right? Man, that's not something that I think many people could disagree with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we should have a corridor, while Australia is an island, which makes it really difficult to have a corridor, but our main corridor should be along the whole Indonesian islands and the Pacific Islands. They're our kind of nearest trading partners, and we should be forming more and more alliances with those corridors rather than a country that's halfway around the world and has no allegiance to Australia. As we know, they'll quite happily steal our markets and steal our trade from us when our back is turned. And so we should be forming those kind of alliances with countries that are that we can, like you say, can have a win-win relationship with.
Yeah. And we've got New Zealand to the east of us, and then the Pacific Islands, and then Southeast Asia. I mean, and really we're in actually a perfect location. I mean, we should be having our own, as the Centre of Political Innovation, when Caleb's been talking about these, was it Sandinista economic zone?
The Sandina Zapata Economic Corridor.
Yeah, corridor.
Yeah. Economic corridor. Correct. Or maybe we should be looking at something like a proper economic zone here that is a win-win cooperation. You're totally right, totally correct there, and it's something where our interests lie on. And I mean, with so much the stuff we're talking about can be quite visionary, and we should be aimed to go for. And it'd be actually it'd also be advancing human societies too to a higher economic order, and that'd be obviously socialism. Get away from this whole cutthroat capitalism like we've been living and been hindering people's growth. Been hindering human development. We can actually move forward, and also to address serious concerns, especially affects us here in Australia, climate change. That is serious. We're still going to get even hotter and hotter summers when bushfires, and all that goes along with it, and floods and sorts of things. So we can then start properly addressing it, and other environmental issues such as land degradation. Put it all back in there again, and cleaning the place up as well. And also, we were mentioning housing before. I mean, I was looking at just while we're talking. I tried to look at the latest median house price for Melbourne. I'm sure it's pretty much well near 800,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, or even more. I mean, we should be looking at planning housing and also developing regional Australia as well. So people, and we're talking about a high-speed rail, we can connect all those places with the capital cities instead of this population drain and capital drain towards the capital cities. We can living Andy and interconnect with high-speed rail. So, we live here in Bendigo, and imagine instead of taking just under 2 hours by train, you mentioned just getting into Melbourne within 20 minutes. Or if you live in Mildura, which is furthest away from Melbourne, it takes a good solid day to get there, about 6 to 8 hours drive. I mean, there's no train service, but what about high speed rail to get you in Melbourne in a couple of hours instead of having to jump on a plane? Same between Sydney and Melbourne too. It stopped a lot of the carbon producing industries, and a high speed rail you can get there within a couple of hours or even less. You can go via Canberra and clear the nation's capital. So, the potential is there.
And if we had that, then we could support a much bigger economy, a much larger population. I mean, we don't have the water resources and things like that, but at the same time, we could develop those with the transport. Once we develop a decent transport system, we can develop other things in areas outside of the city. But while we're limited in how long it takes us to travel around this country, we're restricted to how much we can develop outside our major metropolitan cities. So high-speed rail and a decent rail system would do wonders for this country. The only thing that in terms of preventing a corridor of trade through the Indonesian islands, through the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, China, all on our side of the world, is the idea that they're not the same as us. They're not culturally the same. They're not the same looking as us. They're not our allies because they're different, and that's really the crux of what. Apart from the political differences, which between communism, socialism and capitalism, another real factor in that is the racism that they keep pushing in the Western media, and that helps to continue the divide and rule between workers of Australia and around the rest of the rest of our region. And it's something that we have to overcome as well, and be diligent about, and not just accept it as though it's a political differences. There's a real level of racism against Asia, and we need to struggle against that as well.
Yeah, well, that's part of that war footing, right? Is that they want to demonize the enemy so that we don't see them as human anymore. That we give, we're more likely to give consent to war. We have a similar thing was done before Iraq, before Afghanistan, before Vietnam, going back even further. The idea is that these people are brainwashed, authoritarian, totalitarian drones, soldiers that we must destroy. They're a threat to us. By the way, I always love how we have this concept now known as like Schrodinger's China, where China is simultaneously just about to collapse any day now, but strong enough that it's a threat to the whole world. So that's really funny that the media has somehow simultaneously constructed these two direct opposing stories, but apparently it's concurrent, and apparently it makes logical sense to them.
There's a lot of copium snorting happening in the media at the moment. They're just going, no, they must be snorting lines. No. I know, and look, some of the stuff out there, like I've read, and read it, albeit via social media or other media outlets, and that you think, oh, who wrote this? Is so outlandish, and it's pretty some pretty wild stuff out there at times. And I think, do people honestly want to believe this? I mean, sometimes you got to put the question to it. If you really believe this, I've got I've got the Sydney Harbour Bridge up for sale for $10. Because it's how can some of this stuff be believed? But unfortunately, there are people that I'm not saying that they're stupid, but they will fall for it, and that's something that's going to take a lot of education of people and a lot of persistency to educate them. So it's not in our interest to go to war against China anyway. Well, if we did, we'd lose very quickly. And we'd suffer the consequences. I said China wouldn't be interested in attacking us at all, but we'd suffer. Working people in this country, common working people, would suffer immensely under that evil. It just you can just imagine the dire poverty and destitution. Well, we've got it here already, but it's what 100-fold, 10,000-fold. That's how bad it will be. So it just is. There's no interest for us to be involved in any other country's foreign policy, and we should developing win-win peaceful relations with other countries. So the opportunities there. And I just also too. Dust asked a question a little bit earlier. I'll just how's the movement against Assange's extradition down under? I haven't been really following.
It's not.
It's not really. It's actually quite disgraceful. Just for comrades understanding everyone's viewing, the Australian government's role in all this with Julian Assange has been outright appalling. They've done very little to nothing to help him. They've just basically abandoned him because they love being US's lapdog and receiving the orders from Washington. They're just going to let him rot there in jail. And then they're quite happy to let him be handed over to the US, not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting when I the foreign. Yeah, it's going. Oh well, look, we've even offered that he wants to serve his time here. No, they haven't done that. They haven't done that at all.
Yeah.
Sorry. No?
Yeah. It's not just this government, by the way. It's not just the Morrison government. It's been successive governments ever since Assange has been in exile. Exactly. I mean, wasn't it Julia Gillard who called him a traitor or said words to that effect or something like that?
Yes, she was the Prime Minister at the time.
I don't really remember that. Right, correct, yeah. So, I mean, look, I don't know exactly the phrasing she used, but it was tantamount to implying that he was a traitor or something like that. And that's just disgusting. That's just disgusting behaviour, considering that not only was Assange not responsible for actually leaking the information, he was just reporting on facts that it had leaked. And basically he was just doing his journalistic due diligence. To call him a traitor or imply that he's a traitor just because of that, because he happened to leak very factual thousands of basically human rights violations that Australia and America and the UK have committed over the years. That's exactly what this is. This is the US reacting against the truth, basically. And basically he's dying in prison at the moment, or in isolation at the moment, because he basically just told the truth.
Yeah, I believe he had a stroke over a month. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
The only person that's come out recently, and it was before the information about his stroke, was Barnaby Joyce. That's
a very strange.
But he came out saying that that Assange shouldn't be extradited, and that I can't remember if he said he should be released, but he certainly said he shouldn't be extradited. That doesn't mean that he's coming out of prison.
Of course not.
It's the most ridiculous thing. He doesn't have any charges against him.
Britain
doesn't have any charges against him. So why is he still in prison?
Yeah, that's right.
And it's criminal.
Also,
it's absolutely criminal.
The political oddfellows are coming out because George Christensen, who's I think a national MP, he's a federal MP from North Queensland. He's actually sided with them. He's actually come out publicly spoke for against the jailing of Assange. They wants him released. So some strange bedfellows. That's what I mean. Not oddfellows, but bedfellows are coming out supporting Assange at the moment. But it certainly is a concern because I think a lot of people have got to understand here in Australia, even for us, soon as you actually can speak out and all that, this could be a consequence for anyone around the world that dares speak out and exposes the truth.
Why do you
Because
guys think that George Christensen and Barnaby Joyce have taken on that position lately? Is there any kind of rhyme or reason why they would be adopting that position, especially considering they're the ones in power at the moment, right? Federally. So you would think that they would just, play their cards safe and just say, "Oh, we're not saying anything about it," or just completely ignore it, just like Scott Morrison has been doing.
it's interesting. It's like, especially from the old from conservative side and some of the ultra conservative side of politics. And for those viewers who don't know who Barnaby Joyce is from overseas, he is our deputy prime minister and leader of the National Party. And certainly he plays a reactionary role in other areas. But it's a good question how they're coming out about this. I don't know. Maybe there's something underlying issue they've got. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it certainly is some of the strangest places on hearing some of the support for Assange. But what it's actually, I haven't heard. Look, correct me if I'm wrong too, but the federal opposition has been very little coming from them as well, which is, which is death to quiet. I think the most people have been vocal about it though, giving credit's been the Australian Greens. They've probably been the most vocal out of all of it, but I'm not aware. And look, as I said, if I stop, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be stand corrected on this as well. But I'm not aware of any other of the political parties in the federal parliament at the moment speaking out for
the Labor Party.
No. So it's really, in a lot of ways, it's a disgrace. It is a disgrace.
Yeah. Every Friday night, I attend a vigil at Flinders Street railway station, and which is the major railway station here in Melbourne, and we give out leaflets, and we speak on a megaphone, and we have a whole heap of flags and banners, and we dress one side of the exit from on Flinders Street side of the station, and I've been doing it for most of 2020, but other people have been doing it for years. Not everybody, but certainly a lot of people are supportive of Assange, and that's a good sign. But if we held a demonstration tomorrow, we'd get hardly anybody on it. We'd get maybe 100, a couple of thousand, maybe at the most, sort of, which is, again, it's indicative of the fact that the media doesn't allow for reporting of things that are really, really important. They only report the sensational things that they can make money out of, and that suits the ideology of the time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the military-industrial complex. Yeah.
I believe in regional towns and regional cities there's been vigils as well. Here in Bendigo there's been a few vigils, not as consistent. It'd be good if there was like a vigil every Friday or something like that. I know but there for Julian Assange, but there has been, I believe, around other regional centres as well, both here in Victoria, New South Wales, and elsewhere. But I'm not aware about any of the other capital cities. I mean, I'm too sure up in Sydney if anything's been happening there. I believe there might have been something happening in Perth, but I'm not aware of it. Yeah. So it is a real shame, actually, that it's allowed to happen. I mean, look, people could blame COVID, they can do everything else, but it should have actually been a lot more political pressure to make sure he's brought home and released as well. And it will be a tragedy if he does pass away while he's still incarcerated there in prison. Actually, I rather call it not just in prison, but imprisoned. It should be unlawfully imprisoned as well, or wrongfully, imprisoned as well. So, because there's other questions as well.
Precedent as well. Because sorry to cut off there, because the precedent here that's being set, if and when it's looking certainly at this stage that he will be extradited back to the US. Well, not even back to the US. Can we just say very clear and out the open? Julian Assange is not American, right? He never worked for America. He never did any work for the American state or anything like that. He was not in America. So he's an Australian, right? The precedent that's being set here, if he is extradited to the US, is that America can basically, the US can basically extradite any journalist around the world who reports on their human rights abuses within the US or abroad. And this is really dangerous. Basically, what this means will be is it's an end to journalism as we know it. Because if you're a journalist after this passes, pretend you're a journalist and you're trying to, cover some kind of human rights issue that America or Australia does abroad or within Australian or American borders. What are you going to do? Are you going to report on it, knowing that America or the US can actually take you out of Australia or take you out of wherever country you're in and imprison you in the States? No, of course not. You're not going to take that risk. So you're going to report on something fluffy sounding, another kind of story, something that's very low risk. Or alternatively, what you'll do is you'll report on something that the US empire wants you to report on, and that is how big bad China is, how big bad Venezuela is, how big bad Iran is. All of America's geopolitical enemies, you're going to want to more report on those kinds of stories, regardless of if they're true or not, because that's going to be the least risk of you getting any fire from the US judicial system. So it's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, there's one thing that Assange, the reason that Australia, apart from the fact that it's an ally of the United States and any bad reporting of the United States would be condemned by Australia. The other side of it, what he reported or what he revealed was that Australian prime ministers basically have to front up to the American embassy for approval before they can become the Prime Minister of Australia. So that was one of the things that was revealed. And of course, Australian politicians wouldn't accept that as being a good thing. And America is just going, you can't expose our system like this. This is our system. This is how we operate. We do this because we can. And how dare you tell the rest of the world, what we're doing. It's just appalling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I haven't got anything else to report on. I think there's anything else we want to cover tonight before we close up. I just want to make an announcement. I think we agreed we're going to have a break over the Christmas. Obviously, there's no brainer. Christmas, New Year. I did say we'll be back late January. Would that be the Thursday, the 20th, or the 27th? I think it was. I forgot what date it was.
January 22. That would be Thursday 27th. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So all right. Well, we can be on that. That'll be the last Thursday of January. So that gives us a good break. We can then we'll resume. Then. Well, look. If
can I just say something about Peru itself? So just there are events unfolding in Peru. I think we mentioned them last week. It's an unfolding situation. We cannot expect things to go smoothly when a country is fighting for its independence and its sovereignty against a powerful enemy such as the United States. We cannot, and even internal enemies as well. We cannot expect it to go smoothly. So, for our viewers and for anybody interested in what's happening in Peru, we should keep an eye on it. Hope that things unfold in a manner that benefits the people of Peru. It's quite, it could be that it doesn't, and that's just the nature of the interference from foreign agents such as the United States, interference from internal agents within the country as well. And if the Peruvian people are strong enough and their understanding and their desire for sovereignty and for independence is strong enough, then hopefully it will go more in the direction of Venezuela, Bolivia, and Cuba and so on, Nicaragua.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of precedent in Latin America.
Exactly.
Things don't always start off rosy or successful the first time around. You got to have this open dialectic with the people and see where they're at ideologically and what they want the country to be, and then try and reflect and amplify that back to them just so they can have that feedback loop going. And that's going to take some time. Like you said, Helen, there's a lot of turbulence that's happening in Peru right now. Because of these difficulties and the slim margin that Peru Libre won the last election is causing them a lot of trouble, because even though they are in power, it is they're still up against a great opposition there, which is funded by the US, which is funded by a lot of internal billionaires and other corporations as well. Even a lot of sectors that were the Fujimori loyalists are also in power there as well in the opposition. So yeah, this is going to be a long unfolding series of events. I recommend to anyone who wants to keep up with it. If you want to have a look at Telesur English, just Google Telesur English. They're a really good course in Peru. And there's a few others as well that I can't remember, but I'm sure we'll list them after it.
Exactly. Well, this has been an excellent talk. I think summary. It's been a fantastic reading this actually and studying this program overall, and it certainly is a lot of inspiration. I mean, there was some disjointed translation. I mean, people who probably translated did the best they could. Their understanding of English, but overall, I do highly recommend if you can download it. It's usually on a PDF version. I just have to Google it, and it came across it. So you should be able to read it yourselves. I recommend it as a great study, and it's certainly inspirational and stuff. They gave themselves a program and a fighting program moving forward as well. Yeah, look, and just comment on what's happening in Peru. I mean, look, I've used this term, from Lenin a couple of times. One step forward, two steps back. And I mean, revolution and a way forward. It's not a straight line. It can be all over the place. It can be zigzag and spiral, whatever, and it's going to have its setbacks. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's the people there in Peru got to determine the outcome at the end of the day. But then I think we give them all the support in the world. And yeah, look, I think it's something there's still a lot to learn from. We can also learn from not just their defeats, but also learn from their victories. Sometimes we think, how did they achieve that? And maybe learn something from that as well. So, yeah, it's certainly Central and South America is a happening place. And also, too, congratulations once again to the people of Honduras electing a left-wing government as well. So it's happening. And of course, the US is going to do, Washington's going to do all its best to undermine everybody there, to do whatever it's in power to do so. So it's not surprising, but I think we can do a lot within our own countries too to form our own path. I think the best way to fight imperialism is also to start developing our own path forward as well.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, comrades. Well, that's it for the night. That's it for the year, which is all the best for Christmas and New Year. And that's it for us for 2021. We will resume back again as We Are the Builders on the 27th of January. Will give us a good break and good time to actually work out what we shall be studying next. I'm sure we'll come up with something good. It could be a classic, could be something contemporary. And if anyone's got any further suggestions, feel free to add comments here, or if you're watching these in the future, on the YouTube channel or whatever, feel free to make some comments. We'll certainly take those into account. So we'll finish it off tonight. Once again, I always wanted we always said it was a dare to struggle and dare to win, and because of all countries unite, so dare to struggle,
and dare
to win.
Dare to win.
All workers of all
Have
countries.
A great holiday. All workers of the world. All countries unite. I was just going to say, I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful break.
Yeah. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
And enjoys their family and friends.
Yep. Stay safe, comrades. Catch you.
Bye.